I'm Jimmy Blacklock. There we go. As of 20 days ago, I'm the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, and I'm here to talk with you about funding for the judiciary. I want to focus my time on judicial pay, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the Supreme Court's requests individually after that. Before we talk about that, I want to make two acknowledgments. One is that we're going to be talking here about the judiciary. We're going to say things like our funding and our budgets, talking about this money. And I want to acknowledge something that Senator Kolkhorst said earlier, which is these are not our budgets. This is not our funding. It's not ours. It belongs to the people of Texas who earned it. And I know that you all know that and don't need to hear me say it, but I want you to know that the Texas judiciary knows that too and is well aware of that and wants to help you be good stewards of the people's money as you've been charged to do. The other thing I want to acknowledge is that anytime we talk about salaries, I think it would be rude not to recognize that any salary that you might think about paying judges is far less than what you were paid for what you're doing. And we work these jobs as full-time jobs year-round. I know it's the same for you. Of course, we're in a different category because a big a restriction on our ability to make, there almost is no ability for judges to make outside income because of our ethical restrictions. And so these numbers we're talking about are the personal income of that person. There's no side ventures. And often it's the entire income of a household that we're discussing. You're welcome to leave my salary right where it is. I'm not here for myself. I am here on behalf of my fellow judges and on behalf of the entire Texas judiciary to tell you that I think it's absolutely essential that we as a state raise judicial salaries significantly so that we can attract and retain hardworking rule of law judges who are qualified to wield the extraordinary power that our Constitution gives them. If you think about the total amount of money that's at stake in Texas courtrooms all over the state, it's staggering. My back of the napkin calculation is it's probably on the order of magnitude of the state's annual budget. Think about the economic impact that has, for good or for ill, on our state. But beyond that, think about the lives that are at stake and the families that are at stake and the constitutional rights that are at stake. What's at stake in Texas courtrooms is whether we're going to live in a society where law and order prevails and where people can count on their government to protect them and their families and to protect their rights. That's what's at stake every day in these courtrooms. And so when we talk about judicial pay, we're not talking about whether to raise salaries at this or that government agency. And my personal recommendation with respect to many agencies would probably be that they could better use a Department of Government Efficiency than they could a raise. But we're not talking about any government employees. We're talking about the officers who will be vested by our Constitution with the awesome responsibility of wielding the judicial power. It's an extraordinary power over the lives and fortunes of the people who come into courtrooms across Texas. And the economic reality is that if we pay judges more, there will be more people who are interested in being judges. And more of those people will be high qualified people. That's just the economic reality that goes along with any decision about how much to pay someone who's in your employ. We aren't going to solve the judiciary's problems, all of them, with judicial pay. It's not even close. Nobody's suggesting that. But what I am suggesting and what I think is undeniable is that any serious effort to strengthen the administration of justice in Texas must include a commitment by our state to pay our judges in a way that is commensurate with the enormous responsibility that we ask them to bear. And just as the judicial branch has a solemn obligation to uphold and apply the laws enacted by the legislature, I think you would agree that the legislature has a corresponding obligation to fund the judicial branch at a level that allows for fair and consistent justice to be done across Texas. And I know that all of you understand that. And I want to thank Senator Huffman in particular for the bill that she filed and for her willingness to propose a 15% raise to the base salary for judges. Shows leadership, shows concern for this issue, shows an understanding of what's at stake here, and we appreciate it. I'd like to start a conversation with you about whether we can do even more to make judicial salaries more competitive, which I think we would need to do just to keep up with inflation and to move Texas from near the bottom of the pack nationally to just somewhere in the middle. And I really do want to thank you for your willingness to take this on. One point of reference for context, comparing to the private sector, which is a little bit apples and oranges, but it's a point I want you to hear. A first-year lawyer out of law school who has no experience and goes to a large law firm will be making more money than Chief Justice Nathan Hecht was making after 40 years of service and as the highest paid judge, I think, in the Texas judiciary. Now, the public and private sector is sort of apples and oranges, but I want you to know something else about the public sector, which you might not be aware of, which is that in the last few years, in the last decade or so, salaries in the public sector in Texas government for talented lawyers have gone up significantly and have vastly outpaced what we pay our judges. So the newest member of the Texas Supreme Court took a pay cut of over $100,000 to come from the executive branch to the Texas Supreme Court. There are hundreds of lawyers in the Texas executive branch with far higher salaries than what judges make. And this wasn't the case just 7 or 8 years ago when I was in the executive branch. But inflation and increased competition by large state agencies that have a lot of budget flexibility has caused that discrepancy to grow and grow. And the more that pay disparity in the public sector continues to grow, the harder and harder it's going to become to convince qualified people to accept these appointments or to run for judge. And before I close, I want you to know that I understand the concern. I think it's a legitimate concern that a small number of judges around our state may not be working as hard as the job demands. I have no tolerance for that. I and my colleagues at the Supreme Court are eager to work with you to address that concern, whether it's by legislation or by actions that the Supreme Court can take ourselves. I believe our Constitution provides multiple ways for the judicial branch to, under the court's leadership, to clean up our own messes. And I intend to do as much in that regard as I can, whether legislation passes or not. But whether it's legislation or action by the court, I want to let you know that I understand that concern, I share that concern, and I want to work with you to do something about it. But I urge you not to let a few bad apples spoil the bunch. The vast majority of Texas judges are working very hard every day to administer equal justice across our state. I am proud to call them my colleagues. And I encourage you to keep the hard work and dedication of all these judges, many of whom you know, all over Texas. Keep that in mind when making decisions that affect the entire judiciary. And finally, I also understand another concern that's been expressed, and I think rightfully so, about rulings by judges that can seem sometimes to put the welfare of criminals ahead of the welfare of law-abiding Texans. I have no tolerance for that either. And law-abiding Texans have to be able to rely on their police, on their prosecutors, and on their judges to deter crime, to punish crime, and to protect them from criminals. And if that's not happening, as it should be in some courtrooms across Texas, I want to know about it, and I think we should all be eager to do whatever we can to fix it. But again, when it comes to paying all the many, many judges, the vast majority of judges who are going to work and working hard every day, don't let a few bad apples spoil the bunch. I and the rest of the court are willing and able to work with you to promote law and order, to promote public safety. And the overwhelming majority of judges in your districts and across this state feel the exact same way. So thank you, Senator Huffman. I want to thank you again for taking the initiative with your bill. I look forward to working with you throughout the session to promote the rule of law and be good stewards of the people's money. Happy to take any questions that the committee has. The court has a conference tomorrow. It'll be our first conference where I'm presiding. There are 147 cases on the docket for discussion tomorrow, and so I do have some homework to do, but I am more than happy to stay here and answer any questions that you have for as long as it takes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. Senator Zaffarini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, in your written testimony, you talked about the justice who took more than $100,000 pay cut after he moved from the governor's office to the Supreme Court. And then you say that more than 200 attorneys at the Attorney General's office make more than your staff attorneys. I wonder what that comparison would be if we would include the legislative branch. And do you believe that perhaps we should look at comparing the salaries of attorneys who work in the three branches, judiciary, legislative, and executive?
It's an interesting question and certainly something that you could do and might make sense. With respect to the judicial branch, we're competing for this same talent. We're competing in the same pool for people who would take these jobs in the public sector, many of them very fine public servants, very talented people. But, I will be, with respect to staff attorneys, anybody who's worked on a court of appeals or anybody who's been a staff attorney will tell you how important good staff attorneys are to the fair administration of justice at a court of appeals and at other courts as well. My staff attorney, who's been with the court a long time, may retire before too long. And I'm honestly concerned at the level that we're paying staff attorneys right now, which is the level that we're able to pay them with our budget. I'm concerned about my ability to bring in somebody who's qualified to do that job, because there's a job right next door at the Attorney General's office that pays significantly more money for the same kind of work. And I hope that I can find a public-spirited person who wants to help the court and do that job for lower pay, but it's hard to ask people to take a job like that on for lower pay when there are other jobs in state government where they're gonna be able to take care of their families a lot better.
Thank you. You also referenced beginning salaries versus salaries based on longevity, such as your predecessors. Do you believe that perhaps we should consider looking at the judiciary salaries from the perspective of performance and records, accountability, using perhaps the metrics you use in the Office of Court Administration's Courts of Excellence program, where we consider things like backlog?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's a challenge. Anytime you talk about structuring the salaries in a way that could give judges an incentive to put anything else above the fair and consistent deciding of cases under the law, you want to make sure that nothing else is taking priority over that. And so if we give judges salary incentives that encourage them to seek this or that metric, we have to be very, very careful about the way that might affect the administration of justice in ways that we aren't anticipating. I'm not personally familiar with the precise metrics that you're referring to with the Centers for Excellence, but certainly something that I'll learn more about and be happy to talk with you about.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you heard Senator Hinojosa's questions regarding the IOLTA fees and the reduction in those fees that are available. Do you have any idea at this time regarding how much additional funding would be necessary for us to ensure access to justice for all by providing the appropriate civil legal services for low-income persons?
That's a big question. I don't have a number for you. We're not asking for more money in this request than in previous bienniums, because I think other sources of income for those programs have been deemed to be sufficient for now. But my personal viewpoint on all of that is that the funding is important, but what we also need to be talking about are ways to make the whole system more efficient and not as difficult to navigate, so that the need for the public funding is not so large.
Thank you. The third item on your written testimony here is the judicial branch oversight, and you're asking for additional FTEs so that the chief and the court can perform your constitutional and statutory obligations in overseeing and managing the administrative aspects of the judicial branch. What are those administrative aspects? Are you talking about things like working with the Judicial Commission or the Commission on State Conduct?
Yes.
And the Commission on Mental Health, Office of Court Administration, or what are those administrative duties?
Yeah, so beyond the deciding of cases, which is our core function and what we're focused on as judges on a daily basis, the Supreme Court has been given either by the Constitution or statute or rule a wide array of oversight and management of judicial branch boards and commissions and agencies, and you mentioned a few of them. There are dozens and dozens of these. Each justice is assigned about a half a dozen of them to work with and try to provide some management and oversight to what's going on within the judicial branch. But in that capacity, we don't have staffing for that capacity. Our staff at the court is focused on helping us decide cases and get opinions out the door, which again is our core function. So in that administrative capacity, each of the 9 of us, and the Chief Justice in particular, but all 9 justices participate in this, in the management of all of that org chart, that bureaucracy. We are our own chiefs of staff. and our own appointments directors and our own government relations director and our own policy director, and the justices do that themselves. And we do it as best we can with the resources that we have. But one of my first thoughts that I had as I try to get my head around everything we have going on at the court and in the judicial branch is that we could use chiefs of staff like the talented people you have behind you to help us manage and oversee all of the administrative duties that have been entrusted to us.
Thank you. Several of the senators and several of the members of the House of Representatives have particular interest in some of the groups that you work with, most specifically the Commission on Judicial Conduct. What is the role of the Supreme Court in ensuring that groups like this fulfill their function and have an adequate budget? Do you have any role at all, or are they totally independent of the Supreme Court?
So our constitutional role is primarily appointments, and we appoint, I believe, half a dozen of the members who are judges from various parts of the state. If the legislature is interested in a conversation about, and that's all in the Constitution, the appointment structure for the Conduct Commission is in the Constitution. So changes would require constitutional amendments. But if you, Senator, or anyone else on the committee is interested in opening up that part of our Constitution and thinking about whether the appointment structure that we currently have for the Conduct Commission is ideal for our state, that's a conversation I'd love to have with you. The court also has some rulemaking authority with respect to the Conduct Commission that, of course, can't go beyond what the Constitution or statutes say about the commission, but that does give us some ability to have an influence on the Conduct Commission.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Honor, thank you for being here, and thank you for your service. And I really appreciate your comments. And you know, my dear friend and mentor, Judge Lynn Ellison, retired from Atascosa County. One of his quotes that has always stuck with me over the years, he says that if you ever want to see the Constitution alive and in action, go to a courtroom on any given day. And so, you know, district judges they're a critical component of criminal justice locally. Some of the, besides the county court, the first tier, they're the people's judges, and very important to us. And so I highly support what you're asking for. Well, so what would you think is the attrition rate, for example, of district judges in this state? That's the first question I have. What would be the average? What's your attrition rate? What would you say that is?
I don't know. I don't want to throw out a number.
That people have left because, well, you know, and they've expressed that to me. My judges have said, we're not making it. I mean, and when you have, and God bless our troopers and wardens in Schedule C, but when you have average patrol officer makes more than the district judge.
Yeah, they were sure.
And if you look at the salaries, but in compared with what they're, the scope of what they're doing and their role in criminal justice. So what would you say, do you use is the comparative salary? A lot of times, when you have a sheriff's department, they go around the counties surrounding and get a comp, and then they figure that's the average salary. That's what the market is for this particular job. So so you say we rank at the lowest. Is that nationally, or is that a comp among the states around Texas of the market? What would you say, Judge?
So I think other states are a fair comparison. And I think looking elsewhere in government to where the lawyers of the caliber that we would like to have wearing the robes, what are they making? I think those are two fair comparisons. My understanding is that we are 49th out of 50 among the states in what we pay our district judges. Those numbers go up slightly for the Supreme Court, a little bit more for Court of Appeals. We're in the bottom half in all three categories, and combined, we're somewhere in the 40s. And so, given the cost of living, particularly in our larger cities, which is not nearly at the bottom as compared to other states, those market pressures on people's livelihoods are going to affect their decisions about what they can do with their careers and whether they can stay in these jobs.
So would it be fair to say that we base our budget based on rate of inflation and population growth, that what we pay our judges does not even meet that? Population growth and rate of inflation.
I think that's fair to say over the last
49.
few years.
Yeah, I would think that we are.
I think that's fair to say, and something for the legislature and the committee to think about going forward. Your choice, of course, but there are ways to structure this that would take legislative changes that would build in the sort of cost of living or inflation or those sort of metrics. A lot of states do judicial pay that way so that it isn't a political issue every couple of years. Of course, that's purely within your discretion whether you want to take that up. But if you do, I think it might be well advised.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for your work on this, and I fully support any pay increase we can do for our district judges and our judges. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Senator Hinojosa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sometimes, Chief, we have to remind us and the public that the judiciary is a third equal branch of government, the legislative branch, the executive branch. We forget that. But I guess when you compare oranges and apples, there really is a very similar problem that you have in terms of competition with both the private sector and other governmental entities in terms of pay. So it's not just other government attorneys. So what is the, I guess, starting salary for a lawyer first year out of law school out in the private sector, the average pay?
My understanding at the large law firms that first-year associates make $220,000, something like that.
So would you agree that maybe we ought to also consider raising the qualifications for a person to become a judge?
I think that you certainly could. I'd be more than happy to engage on that question with you and help you think about it if you'd like our help on it. It would require a constitutional amendment, I would think, but I want to be open completely on any ideas that anybody thinks can strengthen the administration of justice in Texas. And I'm happy to be a resource for you and work with you on any ideas that you have in that regard.
Well, I know that we talk about having an attrition or loss of judges, especially at the district court level because of pay. But the reality is that there's never a shortage of candidates. And for us to keep qualified, experienced lawyers, we need to do two things. One is increase the salary, but also increase the qualifications to be able to run for a district court. We tried to do that in the past, and we have made some changes. I don't think it requires a constitutional amendment, but it's an issue that keeps coming up. When I discuss this issue with other lawyers in terms of the number of people who run for district courts and barely meet the minimum requirements, but they seem to not know how to handle trials or do hearings and don't know the full responsibilities of being a district judge. So it's an issue I think that we ought to look
Try
at.
the case.
Or try a case. Correct.
Basic.
Anyway, just a point to consider.
Absolutely, Senator. Happy to have a further conversation with you about that.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Campbell, you're next.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Ma'am.
Well, congratulations, Chief, on your appointment as Chief Justice. And so when you're talking about and making an ask for increased pay, that's across the state for all judges, is that correct?
Yes.
So traveling judges that rotate between different counties and have less caseload than the judge who's assigned to the court, should they get the same pay increase and pay rate as somebody who has a heavy docket, a heavier caseload?
Well, the way things are currently structured is that everything is keyed off of, this is in a statute, everything's keyed off of the salary for a district judge, the base salary for a district judge, and then everybody else's pay is some derivative of that.
Right.
And
But I'm asking for, not meaning to interrupt your thought, but I'm asking for, so right now, for instance, rotating judges get the same pay as a district judge sitting for those counties, correct?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know the specifics about pay for that particular category of judge that you're describing.
Okay, well, I just wanted to see if you were asking for the same increase for a rotating judge versus one that has a heavier caseload.
So Chair Huffman's bill raises the base district judge salary by 15%.
Right.
That's the number that's most commonly discussed. Of course, if you all wanted to separate that number from some of the other
Sure.
numbers and do more, a variety of things, it's all within your discretion to do.
Sure.
But generally, when we talk about a pay raise of the sort that's reflected in the bill, it would lift all the boats.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Paxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And congratulations, Chief Justice, and good to see you here today. I have a question that is a little bit of a departure from the judicial pay raise conversation, but I was, and it might also include, LBB, your comments on this as well, but I was wondering if you might dive in a little more on the Children's Commission, what you're asking for with regard to that. There's a report that was provided by the newly created Juvenile Justice Committee with the Children's Commission, and it just discussed, I guess, highlighted some deficiencies and some needs, and I wondered if you might be prepared to discuss some of that, and if you might inform on that as well.
Yeah, so that's a recommendation that came from the previous administration, and I'm not personally knowledgeable about that particular request. My personal priorities are the items that have been added since I took this position, but we're standing behind the LAR as it is.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And if you had anything, the Legislative Budget Board to include on that.
There we go. Oh, sorry about that. Currently, the recommended amounts are, 4.0 million for the 26-27 biennium, currently.
And Senator Paxton, if I could add, I'm in the process, just a few weeks into this, of wrapping my head around everything that goes on within the government apparatus that is now somewhat my responsibility. Children's Commission is part of that, and so I'm learning more about that and many other entities that we have responsibility for. And if you have thoughts about it, I would love to talk to you about any thoughts or concerns you have about the Children's Commission or anything else that we're doing.
All right, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation on that and just any discrepancies between the LAR and then your recommendations.
First of all, congratulations, Chief Justice.
Thank you.
When we do, and I hadn't heard this, when we compare the salaries of our justices here in Texas to other states, can you kind of give us, have you done that, and can you kind of illuminate exactly what that is?
I haven't checked all these numbers myself, but the data I've been given is that with respect to Supreme Courts, we're 42nd out of 50 in terms of what we pay.
42nd out of 50. I thought Texas was number one.
If you'd like to make us number one, I'm happy to see that.
Well, I'm glad that the chair has put at least 15% in. I think we need to do more, and I will work with her. Okay, gotcha. Will you join author of the bill, though? Well, I said that's the problem. I've been around here long enough to understand that. Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Justice, congratulations. Couple of quick questions. Where are the appellate courts in regards to the backlogs that we saw from COVID-19? I mean, I hate to look back, but we have to. So where are we? Have we gotten rid of the backlogs?
My understanding, and this is another issue that I've got to get a better understanding of as I get into this job, but my understanding is that we are just about through all of that. And there are some lingering problems still in some places, at some trial court levels. I don't believe the courts of appeals are still behind. I believe they're clearing their cases at a rate that they're clearing more cases than what are being filed. And I think they're getting their business done in a way that's can always improve. We want these cases to be processed fairly and correctly, but also efficiently and timely. And so I'm not going to sit here and say we're doing the best we possibly can in that regard, but I do think that we've done a lot of work to dig out of the COVID backlog.
That's good to know. I know on the district level, maybe not. Madam Chair, it's time to have moved on and gotten all those out. So hopefully we can do that. the Commission on Mental Health, and I'll just throw this out there. I know we have a lot of people testifying, but that was created, and I just wonder if you know anything about it, and if it's moving on with recommendations. The idea of it was to improve the delivery of mental health services offered by our LMHAs to individuals incarcerated in our jails. Know anything about it?
I
You're
can't
new
give you a
to the
personal
job.
opinion on that or on whether that's happening in the way that I'd like it to. All I can tell you is that I'm confident in the people who are working on it right now, and I'm working with them to understand it better so that I can do what I need to do to make it work the way it was designed.
Great. I'd love for you, as you kind of work through that, to give you an update on that. It's something, very important. We're making investments, but we want to make sure we created the commission. We want to make sure that we're getting recommendations from those that are, the judicial branch that deals with this so much.
Right.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Your Honor, I kind of, in some ways, equate excellent judges and excellent teachers together. They're highly underpaid, but there's also the corollary to that, right? That bad teachers maybe are overpaid, and judges that have slow work or no work are overpaid as well. Speaking, and I do think judges in Texas, we should raise their base salary and for the work and recognition of the importance that y'all do administering justice. But what do you, as Chief Justice, have from an authority standpoint to implement and kind of push, prod, or peer pressure, or mandate cases move along in certain courts that historically have been relatively slow in getting their docket done?
So as Chief Justice myself, I'm not aware yet of any personal authority that I would have there. But the Supreme Court does have, under our Constitution, I believe it's Article 4, Section 31, has the power to make rules of judicial administration that are not inconsistent with statutes. And that's a power that has been used in the past and could conceivably be used in ways that could help to address some of the problems that you're talking about. And the court is open to those ideas and to trying to use whatever power the people have given us to make the courts function better.
Do y'all, I'm talking about the Supreme Court, get a list of kind of the number of cases that have been tried, adjudicated, handled, and how that looks from a relative standpoint to other courts, and how it was prior to COVID and after COVID? Do y'all look at that in depth? There's a concern amongst, from my understanding, the legislature, that there's been a work slowdown overall in certain courts. And I would think that the Supreme Court, I guess being the regulatory authority for all the courts, would, from what you're just telling me, would want to fix that problem.
Yeah, this goes back a little bit to the conversation that I had with Justice, I'm used to being in a court, I'm calling you Justice, but with Senator Zaffirini, staffing. So I would like the court to be able to be more assertive in this area than perhaps it has been in the past. We have to do that prudently. We have to do that carefully. And if we had the budget for staff who could help us to dive deeper into those issues and understand those issues the way that your staff helps you to understand the important things that you're focused on, it'd be a big benefit to our ability to provide some oversight and management of the judicial branch, as I think the Constitution asks us to do.
Right. So from your perspective as Chief Justice, more of a staffing issue at the Supreme Court level when it comes to evaluating the work product of the other courts. I know you're the brand new Chief Justice, and I respect that.
Well, I will say we do have an Office of Court Administration. Megan Lavoie does a very fine job running that office, and they gather a lot of data about the kind of data that you're talking about. And so we do have access to all kinds of data about what's happening in the courtrooms and how much each judge is doing. There are a couple of jurisdictions where cases are not assigned to a judge, but hearings are rotated on a wheel to different judges. And so it's harder in those places to track judicial efficiency and the progress of cases. But in general, we do have access to pretty good data about what's happening in courtrooms across Texas, and we are able to use that data to make these decisions.
Judicial efficiency, that's a good term for it. Well, I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, but I feel y'all are underpaid. I think some of this holding back of salaries might be enhanced, or the log jam here be broke through if there was a reciprocal push on the part of the Supreme Court, is what you're telling me, to look at that judicial efficiency and really take action. You didn't actually, I think, say when the last time the Supreme Court, maybe you don't know, as the new Chief Justice, took significant action against a court or a judge regarding their lack of efficiency within their docket. Do you happen to know that?
As for when the court took action against a particular judge, the only mechanism for that I'm aware of is a provision in the impeachment article of the Constitution that allows judges to be brought up before the Supreme Court on a petition of a certain number of lawyers who practice before the judge. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court is empowered by that provision to hold a hearing and to take action.
By lawyers that practice before that judge?
Yes.
That seems like a very hard bar to reach.
That's just what the Constitution
says.
says.
So then it comes to just the power vested within the Supreme Court as the oversight court for the entire judicial system to make sure. You want fair and I guess as rapid as possible, constitutionally rapid administration of justice, and we all do as citizens and legislators. But each judge, we don't like to step on their toes, right? I would think, being a judge, as a doctor, I can tell you, I don't, generally don't want to step on another surgeon's toes when it comes to a decision they made. But there comes a place and time to kind of do so.
Yep, Senator, if outside of the impeachment provision that I mentioned, I'm not aware of any way for the court to take action against particular
judges or courts. Yeah.
So what we do is we make rules
remedy
for the administration of justice in all courts that apply to everybody.
Right.
But action against particular judges, I'm only aware of that provision.
So impeachment is a remedy regarding the actual action against a judge or a court or a judge.
Under existing law, that's the remedy that I'm aware of.
Maybe that's something we should look at, members. Y'all are more learned than I am on this. But thank you for your time and answers, Your Honor.
Senator Schwartner, I will comment and say that because you mentioned the words peer pressure, prodding. I've tried that, tried peer pressure, prodding, pleading, not Justice Blacklock with the previous Chief Justice, who certainly would listen, but I think there's only a limited amount that they can actually do because of the independence of the judiciary. So the bill that includes the pay raise includes some more teeth in the Judicial Conduct Commission, some transparency, some accountability on time and how often you work and what you're accomplishing, what your backlog is. And I'm saying it now, and I'll say it again. The pay raise comes with the approval of the transparency and the accountability. It's a package. So look forward to working with y'all, but I'm making that, y'all figure it out because it's got to go together, okay? Sounds like that's what the committee wants, and I think that's what the legislature wants. We're welcome. We want to give you a raise, but we also want certain things from the judiciary. Fair enough?
Fair enough, absolutely. And my overture to you is that there are ways for our branch internally to clean up some of its problems so that we're not having an inter-branch sort of tug and pull about all of it.
Absolutely.
But I want to have that conversation with you.
And if we can help you legislative with that side of it, which I don't think the bill necessarily addresses at this point, happy to work with you on that. It's your recommendations.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Zapparini.
Just by way of following up, Chief, years ago we worked on reporting requirements for the different courts, and the Supreme Court actually had a rule requiring reporting, and Lavoie can correct me if I'm wrong when she testifies, but if I recall correctly, there was a 39% record of responsiveness. 39% of the district courts were complying with those reporting requirements based on a rule of the Supreme Court. So we actually passed legislation establishing in law those reporting requirements to address the very issue that we're talking about. Now, when she comes up, I will ask her the progress made since we passed that bill. But you might want to follow up on that, and that's through the Texas Judicial Council, which you will now chair. I'm sure you'll be gaining great expertise on that subject.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Betancourt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations, but I want to say condolences now because now you've got the other side of the job. And I think that the chair is absolutely 100% right about combining the two, Chief Justice, because one of my favorite sayings is what gets measured gets fixed. And there is a problem that Senator Swartner brought up because until recently, we had people that were not even doing hearings in person still 4 years later after COVID, at least in Harris County. Of course, I had a tax assessor that hadn't shown up to work in 4 years after COVID in Harris County. That person's no longer on as an elected official. But I think the teeth need really be there, Madam Chair, because the variance and the productivity level is astonishing. And if we're going to hand out raises, we want to hand raises out to productive people and not people that are simply not doing their job. So condolences, buck stops with you on the leadership in that area, because really you all set the tone.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions. Thank you very much for being here, Chief Justice, and sharing your perspective. We realize you're very new at the job, and it's not fun to jump into the Finance Committee when